The small road outside Wereth looks stable now, marked with stones and name plaques. Locals still whisper about the 11 men. Everyone knows. But no one was charged. One detail keeps repeating. A bar of soap. Clean. Unused. Impossible to forget. In an old recording, Maria Langer speaks softly. He was very polite. He said thank you. I cannot pretend to understand what it felt like to receive such a gift with armed men standing outside your door. This memorial is public work. The list of those present has been known. But the reason why remains unanswered. Mager Bradley learned about survival before he learned to read well. Bolivar County stretched flat and unforgiving under the Mississippi sun, cotton fields extending to horizons that seemed to mock the idea of escape. The heat wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a physical presence, something that pressed down on your shoulders and made every breath feel like work. His family worked land they'd never own. His father moved through the rows with methodical precision, teaching young Mager that efficiency wasn't just about getting work done. It was about getting work done before someone decided you weren't working hard enough. His mother kept a garden behind their cabin, coaxing vegetables from soil that seemed determined to grow only cotton and resentment. Keep your head right, his father told him when he was 8 years old, maybe 9. The exact age didn't matter as much as the lesson. Not down, not up. Right, you understand? Mager understood. He understood that right meant a calculation that changed depending on who was watching, what mood they were in, whether the cotton yield was good or bad that season. He learned to read situations before he learned to read books, which white men would pass by without incident, which ones were looking for trouble, which ones created trouble without even looking. The schoolhouse for black children operated 4 months a year, when labor demands permitted. The teacher, Miss Roberta Washington, taught with a fierce determination that suggested she knew she was fighting against time itself. She had maybe 30 students ranging from 6 to 16, all crammed into a one-room building that leaked when it rained and baked when it didn't. You are not what they say you are, she told them every morning. You are not less. You are not stupid. You are not lazy. Repeat it. They repeated it. Mager repeated it. But outside those walls, the world had different lessons. He was 12 when he saw a man beaten for looking at a white woman too long. Or maybe not long enough. Or maybe just for being there. The reasons shifted depending on who told the story afterward. What didn't shift was the message. Your presence is conditional, temporary, revocable. Major's mother found him sitting behind the cabin that evening, hands pressed against his knees, jaw tight. Come inside, she said. In a minute? Now? Major. Inside. She made him wash his hands even though they weren't dirty. She put food in front of him even though he wasn't hungry. She sat across from him and waited until he looked up. You can't carry what you saw, she said. You can witness it. You can remember it. But you can't carry it like it's yours to fix. What if I want to fix it? Then you'll break yourself trying. She leaned forward. Listen to me. There's a difference between accepting what is and accepting what should be. You understand that difference? He didn't. Not then. But he would. By 15, Mager was working full days in the fields, his childhood compressed into a brief window that closed when his labor became valuable. He was tall for his age, strong, capable of keeping pace with grown men. The landowner noticed. The pay didn't increase, but the expectations did. He learned the mathematics of survival. How much to produce to avoid punishment. How little to reveal to avoid being seen as a threat. How to move through the world as though he took up less space than his body actually occupied. When he turned 17, his father sat him down with the kind of seriousness that meant something had shifted. You thinking about leaving? His father asked. Mager hadn't been, not consciously. But the question planted something. Where would I go? Anywhere that isn't here. His father looked out the window at the fields they'd worked for 20 years without ownership, without equity, without even the pretense of fair wages. You stay here, you'll do what I did. Work until your back gives out. Then work some more, because stopping means starving. What about you and Mama? We've already made our choices. You haven't made yours yet. 3 months later, Mager Bradley left Bolivar County with $8 in his pocket, a change of clothes, and the Woodbury soap his mother pressed into his hands. Smells like home, she said. When things get hard, and they will get hard, you smell this, and remember you come from people who survived. He wrapped it carefully and put it at the bottom of his bag. Muskogee wasn't paradise, but it was different. The weight of Mississippi lifted slightly, replaced by something that felt almost like possibility. Major found work on a ranch outside town, tending horses and mending fences. The pay was better than Mississippi. Not good, but better. The owner, a Cherokee man named Frank Thornton, treated his workers with a brusque fairness that felt radical after a lifetime of something else. "You know horses?" Frank asked during the interview. That wasn't really an interview. "No, sir." "You willing to learn?" "Yes, sir." "Then you're hired. Pay is at the end of every week. You steal from me, you're gone. You work hard, we won't have problems." They didn't have problems. Magger learned horses the way he'd learned everything else, by watching, by trying, by failing quietly and adjusting. He learned that horses responded to calm consistency, that they could sense fear and uncertainty, that earning their trust was a process that couldn't be rushed. He lived in a small cabin on the property with two other ranch hands, Leon, who was 22 and had come from Arkansas, and Thomas, who was 40 and didn't talk much about where he'd come from. They cooked communal meals, pooled resources for supplies, and developed the kind of easy camaraderie that comes from shared work and limited options for entertainment. On Saturday nights, they'd walk into town, not far, maybe 3 miles to the part of Muskogee where black folks gathered. There was a church that held social nights, a juke joint that operated semi-legally, a restaurant that served the best fried catfish Magger had tasted since leaving Mississippi. That's where he met Eva May. She was working as a waitress, moving between tables with an efficiency that suggested she'd been doing this long enough to anticipate problems before they emerged. She was younger than him, 19 to his 23, but carried herself with a composure that made age feel irrelevant. "What can I get you?" she asked, pen poised over her order pad. "Whatever's good? Everything's good. What do you want?" He smiled. "Catfish. And whatever comes with it." She wrote it down without looking, eyes already moving to the next table. But when she came back with his food, she paused. "You're new." "Been here about 4 months." "Where from?" "Mississippi, Bolivar County." Something shifted in her expression, recognition, maybe, or kinship. "My people are from Alabama." "Similar situation." "How long you been here?" 2 years. "Came with my sister." She glanced toward the kitchen. "I should." "Yeah. Thank you." She nodded and moved on. But the next Saturday, when he came back, she smiled when she saw him. And the Saturday after that, she sat down during her break. "Tell me about the horses," she said. So he did. He told her about learning to read their moods, about the satisfaction of getting a skittish horse to trust you, about the way mornings on the ranch felt clean in a way that Mississippi never had. She told him about growing up in Birmingham, about the sister who'd married a man from Oklahoma and convinced Eva May to come west, about her plan to save enough money to eventually open her own restaurant. "Not a place like this," she clarified. "Something nicer. Somewhere families would come. Good food, fair prices, treated right." "You'll do it," he said. "How do you know?" "Because you talk about it like it's already real. You're just waiting for the world to catch up." She laughed at that, but he saw something in her expression that suggested she appreciated being seen that way, as someone moving towards something, not just away from something else. They started walking together after her shifts. Muskogee at night was quiet in a peaceful way, not the tense quiet of places where trouble fermented. They talked about everything and nothing, about the books she'd read in the small library that allowed black patrons 2 afternoons a week, about the places they wanted to visit someday, about whether it was better to plan carefully or take risks when opportunities appeared. "What do you want?" she asked him once. The question direct and unadorned. He thought about it. "A place that's mine. Not rented, not borrowed. Mine. With enough land for a garden and maybe a few chickens. Nothing fancy. Just yours. Just mine." He paused. "And someone to share it with." She looked at him then, really looked, and he saw the decision being made in real time. "That sounds good," she said. They married 6 months later at the courthouse. Magger wore a borrowed suit that was too big in the shoulders and too short in the legs. Eva May wore a blue dress her sister had made, simple and perfect. The clerk who processed their paperwork looked bored, stamping documents with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. But when Mager signed his name slowly, carefully, the letters formed with concentration, Eva May squeezed his hand. "We're going to be fine," she whispered. "Better than fine." They rented a small house on the east side of town, 2 rooms and a kitchen that barely qualified as such. The roof leaked in one corner when it rained hard. The stove was temperamental. The windows didn't quite close all the way. It was perfect. Eva May kept working at the restaurant, saving every spare dollar. Mager kept working at the ranch, learning more about horses and cattle, earning Frank's trust enough that he was given more responsibility. They talked about the future in concrete terms. How much they'd need to save for a down payment, which neighborhoods might be possibilities, whether 2 bedrooms would be enough or if they should aim for 3. For the children? Mager asked. For the children, Eva May confirmed, and the way she said it made those hypothetical future children feel almost present. At night, they'd lie in their 2 small bed and listen to the sounds of Muskogee settling down for sleep, dogs barking, distant conversations, the occasional car passing. Mager would think about how different this was from Mississippi, how the air itself felt different, how possibility existed here in a way it hadn't before. But he also noticed the news. War in Europe, escalating, spreading, men enlisting or being drafted. The world shifting in ways that felt both distant and inevitable. "You worried about it?" Eva May asked one night, sensing his thoughts. "Some. They'll draft you eventually. Maybe. Not maybe. You're young, healthy, unmarried." She stopped. "Well, married. But that won't matter." He pulled her closer. "If it happens, it happens. We'll manage." But they both knew managing would mean something different than it had before. Would mean separation, waiting, uncertainty. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Promise me you'll be careful. Not reckless. Not trying to be a hero. Just careful. I promise." She made him repeat it. He did, meaning it as much as anyone can mean promises about circumstances they can't control. The draft notice came in October. Mager held the envelope for a long time before opening it, as though delay might change its contents. Eva May watched from the doorway, arms crossed, face composed in that way that meant she was working hard to stay composed. "Well," she finally said, "report for induction November 15th. Where?" "Fort Sill. Basic training." They sat together at the small kitchen table, the notice between them, like evidence of something they'd hoped wouldn't happen but knew would. "We have a month," Eva May said. "Almost 6 weeks. Then let's not waste it being sad." They didn't waste it. They walked through Muskogee like they were memorizing it. They ate at every restaurant they'd ever talked about trying. They went to church services and social nights, danced until their feet hurt, spent lazy Sundays doing nothing but being together. Eva May took photographs, not many, because film was expensive, but enough. Mager in front of their house. Both of them at the ranch where he worked. A self-conscious portrait at a studio downtown. Both dressed up, trying to look natural, and failing in a way that made them laugh. Frank Thornton gave him a bonus when he left $20, which was more money than Mager had expected. "You come back? You've got work," Frank said. "You hear me? You come back?" "Yes, sir. Thank you." Leon and Thomas threw him a small party at the cabin, fried chicken, whiskey that burned going down, stories that got more exaggerated as the night went on. They slapped his back, told him to keep his head down, promised to write, even though none of them were much for writing. The night before he left, Eva May was quiet. They lay in bed, neither sleeping, both pretending the other might be. "I wish we'd had more time," she finally said. "We'll have time after. You don't know that." "I know, I'll try." He rolled toward her. "I'm not ready to give up that house we're going to buy. That garden. Those chickens." She smiled, despite herself. "Chickens. At least 3. Maybe 4. Why stop at 4? You're right. A whole flock." Eva May Bradley, chicken magnate. She laughed, then stopped, the sound breaking into something else. "Come back to me," she said. "However long it takes, whatever happens, just come back." "I will." "Say it again." "I will come back to you." She made him repeat it 3 more times, as though repetition could transform promise into guarantee. Basic training was designed to break you down and rebuild you into something useful to the Army. For black soldiers, it was designed to do that while reinforcing that you were separate, lesser, provisional. The barracks were older, maintenance deferred. The equipment was whatever white units didn't need anymore. The training officers were a mix, some professional and fair, some openly hostile, most somewhere in between. Magyar kept his head down and did the work. Physical training, marksmanship, field exercises, endless drilling. He was good at it, better than average, which earned him the attention he'd been trying to avoid. Bradley. Sergeant Haynes called one afternoon after rifle practice. "You shoot like that consistently?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Where'd you learn?" "Hunting, mostly." "Back in Mississippi." Haynes nodded, making a note on his clipboard. "Keep it up." Being good at something in the Army was complicated. It meant opportunity, but also exposure. It meant higher expectations and harsher punishment if you failed to meet them. Magyar navigated that tension the way he'd learned to navigate everything else, by being competent without being threatening, skilled without being showy. He made friends carefully. Thomas Forte, from Detroit, who was smart and funny and angry in a way he tried to hide. Curtis Adams, from North Carolina, who was 21 and treated everything like an adventure he hadn't quite figured out yet. George Davis Jr., who was quiet but observant, who noticed things other people missed. They formed the kind of bonds that develop under pressure, not deep exactly, but solid, reliable. They watched each other's backs during training exercises, shared cigarettes and food packages from home, talked about what they'd do after the war, in voices that suggested they believed those futures were possible. Eva May wrote every week, sometimes twice a week. Her letters were careful chronicles of ordinary life, what was happening at the restaurant, how her sister was doing, small pieces of Muskogee news. She never complained, never expressed fear directly, but Magyar could read between the lines. He knew when she was anxious, by how many times she told him to be careful. He knew when she was lonely by how much detail she included about mundane tasks, as though creating an intimacy through description. He wrote back with similar care. He told her about training without emphasizing the harder parts. He described the other soldiers without mentioning the tensions. He talked about the future, that house, that garden, those chickens, like it was waiting for them, fully formed, just beyond the war's conclusion. He sent money when he could, small amounts saved from his pay. She wrote back that she was putting it all toward their savings, not spending a penny, keeping their dream intact. The 333rd Field Artillery Battalion shipped to England in early 1943. The Atlantic crossing was brutal, rough seas, cramped conditions, men getting sick in shifts. Magyar spent most of it on deck when he could, preferring cold air and ocean spray to the stale heat below. England was gray and wet and grimly determined. The British had been at war for years by then. It showed in the rationing, the bombed-out buildings still unrepaired, the exhaustion that seemed to permeate everything. The battalion trained more, learning to work with different equipment, coordinating with other units, preparing for an invasion everyone knew was coming, but nobody could predict exactly. Magyar was assigned to a gun crew operating a 155mm howitzer massive, precise, requiring coordination between 6 men to operate effectively. He was good at it. The mathematics of trajectory and wind speed, the discipline of repeated practice, the trust required between crew members, it all fit his temperament. They called him steady because he never rushed, never panicked, never made careless mistakes. It wasn't exactly a compliment in a culture that often valued aggression and bravado, but it was respect of a kind. Letters from Eva May arrived irregularly now, delayed by logistics and distance. When they did come, Magyar read them multiple times, memorizing the way she described her days, the specific words she chose, the subtext beneath the surface text. "I miss you" became their most common phrase, appearing in every letter from both sides, inadequate but necessary. By December 1943, after a year in the Army, Magyar had changed in ways that were both obvious and subtle. He was stronger physically, harder. He'd learned to sleep anywhere, eat anything, keep going when his body wanted to stop. But he'd also learned to compartmentalize, to put his Mississippi education and his Oklahoma hopes into separate mental boxes that he could access when safe and seal off when necessary. He kept the soap wrapped carefully in his pack, checking on it periodically like it might have disappeared. It had become talismanic, not in any magical sense, but as a physical reminder that he existed beyond this moment, this war, this version of himself that the Army was trying to create. Thomas Forte noticed him checking it once. "What is that?" "Soap." I can see that. Why do you keep it like that? It's not like it's gold. My mother gave it to me. When I left Mississippi, Thomas nodded, understanding immediately. Everyone carried something, a photo, a letter, a lucky coin, something that connected them to before. The soap was Mager's before. You ever going to use it? When I get home, give it to Eva May. That's your wife? That's my wife. She know you're saving soap for her? Thomas grinned. She knows I'm coming home. That's what matters. The invasion came in June. The 333rd wasn't part of the initial D-Day landings, but followed soon after, supporting the advance through France with artillery fire that helped clear paths for infantry. The work was constant, exhausting, dangerous, in ways that were both immediate and deferred. Immediate when enemy artillery fired back, when aircraft strafed positions, when shrapnel from explosions found unlucky targets. Deferred in the sense that every mission increased the statistical likelihood that luck would run out. Major kept working. Steady, professional, doing his job while trying not to think too hard about what his job actually meant, that he was helping to kill people, that those people were trying to kill him, that this was somehow normal and necessary and would eventually end. France in summer was beautiful in a way that made the war feel even more obscene. Fields of wildflowers growing beside destroyed villages. Sunlight filtering through trees that shaded freshly dug graves. Birds singing over the sounds of distant artillery. The locals were grateful, mostly, though that gratitude was complicated by years of occupation, by collaboration and resistance, by the fact that liberation came with its own costs. They brought food when they could, shared wine, thanked the soldiers in broken English or patient French. But the black soldiers noticed the difference. How they were welcomed, but also kept at a careful distance. How the French gratitude seemed genuine, but also provisional. How, even here, even now, the hierarchies persisted. At least they feed us before they discriminate. Curtis Adams joked after a village woman brought them bread and cheese while barely acknowledging the white soldiers nearby. Small victories, Thomas agreed. They were sitting near their gun position, taking advantage of a rare quiet afternoon. Major was cleaning his rifle with methodical care, the motions automatic after so many repetitions. You ever think about what happens after? Curtis asked. After the war? Yeah, all the time. What's the first thing you're going to do? Mager thought about it. Get married. Again. Proper wedding this time, with family and friends and a cake. Then buy that house I keep talking about. Then sit on the porch doing absolutely nothing for about a week. That's it? That's your plan? That's my plan. Mager looked up. What about you? Going to college. GI Bill should pay for it. Going to study engineering, build bridges, or buildings, or something that stays built. Curtis leaned back. Going to do something that matters after spending all this time destroying things. That's a good plan. If we make it that far, we'll make it. Curtis smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. They all said that we'll make it, but nobody really believed it anymore. Too many people hadn't made it. Too many names added to lists. Too many letters sent home. Too many positions that needed filling after someone disappeared. Eva May's letters continued arriving, though less frequently now. The logistics of mail delivery in a war zone meant weeks could pass between letters. Then 3 would arrive on the same day. Mager read them in order, recreating the timeline of her life during his absence. She'd gotten a promotion at the restaurant supervisor now, managing other waitresses, dealing with inventory, and ordering. The money was better, the hours were longer. She was still saving, still planning, still keeping their future intact. I visit the house we're going to buy, she wrote in August. I know we haven't actually found it yet, but I visit it anyway in my mind. I walk through the rooms and decide where furniture will go. I plan the garden. I imagine you on that porch, doing nothing for a week like you promised. It keeps me going when things get hard. Mager wrote back. Keep visiting it. I'll meet you there when this is over. I promise. By autumn, the advance had slowed. The war was grinding now. Progress measured in miles instead of momentum. The 333rd was repositioned multiple times, supporting different operations, filling gaps, doing the unglamorous work that kept the larger machine functioning. They were tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Tired of being cold, being wet, being hungry, being scared. Tired of seeing friends, wounded or killed. Tired of the randomness. How some people survived direct hits, while others died from bad luck and trajectory. Mager had been doing this for over 2 years now. He'd left Mississippi at 23, full of something he wouldn't have called optimism, but maybe was. Now he was 27, feeling both older and younger than that number suggested. Older in experience, younger in the loss of certainty. He still carried the soap, still checked on it, still planned to give it to Eva May. "You're obsessed with that soap," Thomas said one evening. "Maybe. What's it represent? Home? Something like that." "You know what I think it represents?" Thomas lit a cigarette. "I think it represents belief, that things can be clean again, that we can go back to being people who care about things like soap and clean clothes and tomorrow." That's pretty philosophical for someone who smells like he hasn't bathed in 3 weeks. "Fuck you, Bradley. I smell like victory." "Victory smells terrible." They laughed, the sound strange and out of place but necessary. Laughter was another form of resistance, a way of insisting that they were still human despite everything trying to prove otherwise. November came, and with it the cold. Not just cold, but bitter. Penetrating. The kind of cold that made you question whether you'd ever really been warm. The rain turned to sleet, then snow. Conditions deteriorated rapidly. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," their commanding officer told them during a briefing. "German forces are regrouping. Intelligence suggests they're planning something. We just don't know what yet. Stay alert. Stay ready." The warning felt both ominous and routine. Every briefing for months had included some version of "stay alert." It stopped meaning anything specific and started meaning everything general, that bad things were always possible, that safety was always temporary, that this moment of relative calm could shatter without warning. On December 15th, the morning was quiet. Too quiet, everyone said later, though in the moment it just felt like a relief. Mager shaved carefully with water that had frozen overnight, scraping ice off first, working the razor with patient strokes. His hands were cold, his face stiff, but the routine mattered. It was how he maintained himself, how he insisted that details still counted. Thomas Forte watched him from across the small clearing where they positioned their gun. "You and that shaving routine. Some of us take pride in our appearance. Some of us realize that nobody cares what we look like when we're freezing to death. Eva May cares. Eva May isn't here. Doesn't matter. I'm still married to her." Mager rinsed the razor. "You'll understand when you find someone." "If I find someone, when?" The conversation felt normal, safe, like conversations they'd had dozens of times. Neither of them knew it was one of the last normal conversations they'd have. By mid-afternoon, everything changed. The German offensive hit hard and fast, the attack that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, though they didn't know that name yet. What they knew was artillery fire, movement, orders to retreat and regroup, chaos spreading faster than information. The 333rd was ordered to support the withdrawal, to provide covering fire while other units pulled back. It was a necessary mission, a strategic mission, and everyone understood what it really meant. Some people would cover the retreat while others retreated, and the people covering would be exposed, vulnerable, likely to face the advancing enemy with limited support. Mager received the order and nodded. This was the job. This was what they'd trained for. This was the moment when all the preparation was supposed to matter. "Stay together," the lieutenant said. "Stay in communication. Cover the withdrawal and then withdraw yourselves. Don't be heroes. Just do the job." They did the job. The gun crew worked with practiced efficiency, loading, aiming, firing, adjusting. The howitzer boomed repeatedly, each shot precise, each one buying a few more minutes for the troops falling back behind them. But the situation deteriorated faster than anyone expected. Communication broke down. Units got separated. The organized retreat became a scattered flight as German forces pushed harder than anticipated. At some point, exactly when, was never clear, the order came to abandon the position and move out on foot. Leave the guns. Save yourselves. Regroup at a rally point that kept changing as reports came in. Mager grabbed his rifle and pack. The pack with the soap wrapped carefully inside. The soap that smelled like Mississippi, that his mother had given him, that he'd promised to give to Eva May. "This way," someone shouted, and they moved. 11 men from different units, thrown together by circumstance, moving through snow-covered forest because the roads were too dangerous. Curtis Adams, George Davis, Junior Thomas Forte, Robert Greene, James Leatherwood, Nathaniel Moss, George Motton, William Pritchett, James Stewart, Dew Turner, and Mager Bradley. 11 men who didn't know they were about to become a list. They walked for hours through forest that seemed designed to kill them slowly. Snow drifted to mid-calf in some places, making every step exhausting. The cold penetrated through every layer of clothing, through skin, into bones. Their breath came in ragged clouds that dispersed immediately in the frigid air. No one spoke much. Speaking required energy they needed for walking. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of shared struggle, of men focused on the same goal. Survival until morning. Major thought about Eva May during the walk. About her letters, her careful handwriting, her descriptions of the house they'd buy, and the garden she'd plant. He thought about the last time he'd seen her at the Muskogee train station. The way she'd kept smoothing her borrowed coat. The way she'd made him promise to write, even when he had nothing to say. He'd kept that promise. He'd written regularly, honestly, maintaining the connection even when separated by an ocean and a war. And she'd written back, keeping him tethered to a life that existed beyond this moment, this cold, this fear. How much further? Someone asked. Don't know, Curtis answered. Until we get there. Helpful. They kept walking. At some point, the forest opened up, and they saw a small village, smoke rising from chimneys, the promise of warmth and shelter. We should bypass it, George Davis said. Too risky. We'll freeze if we keep going, James Leatherwood countered. Look at us. We need to warm up, at least for an hour. The debate was brief, cold one. They approached carefully, weapons ready but not raised, trying to look less like a threat and more like desperate men seeking temporary refuge. The village was Wereth. The house they chose belonged to Matthias Langer. Matthias Langer opened the door to find 11 black soldiers standing in his yard, exhausted, freezing, clearly in trouble. He hesitated not because he didn't want to help, but because helping came with enormous risk. This was occupied territory. German forces were nearby, possibly very nearby. Harboring enemy soldiers could result in execution. But they were freezing. And they were armed, which meant refusing wasn't really an option. And somewhere in that complex calculation, Matthias made the choice that would define the rest of his life. Come in, he said in French, quickly. They filed in, 11 men suddenly crowding a small farmhouse, bringing with them the smell of wet wool, cold sweat, fear, and something else, hope, maybe, or just relief. The warmth hit like a physical blow. Mager felt his face burning as circulation returned. His fingers ached, his feet throbbed, but for the first time in hours, he wasn't quite so cold. Maria Langer watched from the corner, a girl of maybe 10 or 11, wide-eyed, but not scared exactly, more fascinated. These were Americans, liberators, soldiers who'd come to free Belgium from occupation, but they looked so tired, so cold, so young, some of them. Matthias's wife brought coffee ersatz coffee, made from whatever substitute was available, but hot and bitter and wonderful. She brought bread. Not much, because they didn't have much, but what they had they shared. The soldiers removed their boots near the stove, creating a small lake of melting snow on the floor. They flexed their fingers near the heat. They ate the bread slowly, making it last, trying not to look too hungry even though they were starving. Mager sat with his pack in his lap, suddenly aware of what he was carrying. The soap, his mother's gift. The object that had traveled from Mississippi to Oklahoma to England to France to Belgium, surviving everything, wrapped carefully, meant for Eva May, but here now, in this moment. He looked at Maria, who was staring at him with undisguised curiosity. He looked at Mrs. Langer, who'd given them food without asking for anything in return. He looked at Matthias, who'd taken an enormous risk, letting them in. And he made a decision. He reached into his pack and unwrapped the soap. The paper was soft now, worn thin by handling and time. The soap itself was intact, clean, still smelling faintly of whatever ingredients Woodbury had used back in Mississippi all those years ago. He stood and walked to Maria, holding it out. For you, he said in English, hoping his tone would communicate what his words might not. Thank you. Maria looked at her father, who nodded. She took the soap carefully, holding it like something precious. Merci, she whispered. He was very polite, she would say years later. He said thank you. He looked so tired. The hour passed too quickly. They warmed up. They rested. They allowed themselves to believe, briefly, that they might survive this. Then came the knock on the door. Matthias's face went pale. He knew that knock authoritative, demanding, not a request but an announcement. German soldiers. SS, based on the voices outside, the harsh commands, the absolute certainty that compliance was expected. Mager and the others exchanged glances. They could fight. They had weapons. But fighting meant endangering the family that had sheltered them. Fighting meant turning this farmhouse into a battlefield with civilians inside. Don't, Matthias said, reading their thoughts. Please, my family. The decision was made in silence. They set down their weapons. They raised their hands. They surrendered not because they were cowards, but because refusing would have made victims of people who'd shown them kindness. The door opened. German soldiers entered, professional and efficient. They searched the Americans, confiscated weapons, bound hands with wire that cut into wrists. Maria watched from behind her mother, her hand still clutching the soap. She made a small sound, not quite a cry, not quite a gasp, when one of the soldiers shoved Thomas Forte. Quiet, Mrs. Langer whispered, pulling her daughter back. They were marched outside into cold that felt even more brutal after the brief warmth. The snow had started again, light flakes that landed on Mager's face and melted immediately from body heat that was already fading. They were lined up, counted, marched away from the house, away from the village, toward where, no one said. No destination was given, just march and move and Schnell. The 11 men walked. They had no choice but to walk. Mager thought about Eva May, about Oklahoma, about the house they'd never buy now, the garden they'd never plant, the porch where he'd never sit doing nothing. He thought about the soap he'd just given away, his mother's gift, his connection to home, and he realized he was glad he'd given it, glad it had served a purpose, glad his last act of free will had been to thank someone for kindness. Stay together, Curtis whispered. Quiet, a guard snapped. They stayed together anyway. What else could they do? The walk continued, away from warmth, away from shelter, away from any possibility of survival. At some point, Mager understood with absolute clarity that they weren't being marched to a prison camp. This wasn't about detention. This was about something else. He looked at Thomas Forte beside him. Thomas's face showed the same understanding. They kept walking. Eva May didn't know yet, couldn't know, was living in the present while her husband was already dying or dead in her future. She worked her shifts at the restaurant, managing the other waitresses, dealing with difficult customers, saving money that would never be needed for the house they'd never buy. She wrote letters that would never be read, or read too late, or read by someone else, sorting through the effects of the dead. She checked the mailbox every day, sometimes twice a day, hoping for a letter from Mager that was increasingly overdue. December passed into January. January into February, other families on her street received telegrams. She heard the screams, the wailing, the sounds of grief that couldn't be contained. Each time, she felt simultaneous relief and guilt relief that it wasn't her. Guilt for feeling relieved. Then, on February 23rd, 1945, her telegram came. The knock on the door came mid-morning. She was alone, getting ready for her shift, pinning her hair up in the mirror. She saw the Western Union man through the window and knew immediately. She opened the door before he could knock again. Mrs. Bradley? Yes. He handed her the telegram, mumbled something that might have been sorry, and left quickly. She held it for a long time. The envelope was light, but it felt heavy. How could a piece of paper weigh so much? Finally, she opened it. I regret to inform you, Sergeant Mager Bradley, missing in action since December 16. Belgium stop, presumed dead. Stop letter follows stop. Missing, presumed dead. Not killed in action, which would have been definitive. Not wounded, which would have offered hope. Missing, presumed. Words that created a space between life and death. A space where she would live for weeks, then months, then forever. She folded the telegram. Once. Twice. She put it in the drawer beside the letters from Mager, beside the photograph from their courthouse wedding, beside the envelope where she kept money they'd saved. Then she sat down and didn't move for 3 hours. When her sister came by to walk with her to work, She found Eva May sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded, face composed, body absolutely still. Eva May? He's missing. What? Major. Missing in action. Presumed dead. Her sister sat down across from her, reaching for her hands. Oh, honey, I don't know how to be, Eva May said. I don't know if I'm a widow or a wife. I don't know if I should hope or grieve. I don't know what to do. You don't have to know yet. But that was the problem. The not knowing was worse than knowing. The space between missing and dead was a space where everything hurt and nothing helped. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Eva May worked because working gave her something to focus on. She wrote letters to Magyar because stopping would mean accepting what she wasn't ready to accept. She checked the mailbox because maybe, somehow, there would be news. In March, a longer letter arrived from the army. More details, but not answers. Major was part of a group that had been separated during the retreat. The group had been reported at Wereth on December 16th. After that, nothing. The area had been retaken in late January. Evidence suggested. The letter grew vague here, using language that sounded official but communicated nothing clear. In April, another letter. Remains had been found. 11 sets. Identification was in progress. She should prepare for notification. Prepare how? Prepare what? In June, confirmation. Major Bradley's remains had been positively identified. He had been killed December 17th or 18th, 1944. Circumstances unclear. Investigation ongoing. Killed. Not missing anymore. Dead. Definitely, officially, irrevocably, dead. Eva May sat with that knowledge, turning it over, trying to make it fit into the space where hope had been. It didn't fit. Death never quite fits into the space that life carved out. She had choices now. The army gave families choices about where to bury their dead. She could leave him in Belgium, in a military cemetery with thousands of others, or she could bring him home. She chose home. Bringing him home required paperwork, persistence, advocacy, and patience. The army didn't make it easy, not deliberately obstructionist, just bureaucratic, slow, overwhelmed by thousands of similar requests. Eva May filled out forms in careful block letters, mimicking Magyar's handwriting style. She wrote letters to officials. She contacted her congressman's office. She refused to accept delays or deflections. I want my husband home, she said in every communication. He promised to come home. I'm making sure he does. The process took months. Authorization forms. Transportation, logistics. Identification, verification. Coffin selection. Burial location, approval. Fort Gibson National Cemetery agreed to accept him. Row 6. Section B. A plot with other veterans. A place that would be maintained forever. The funeral was scheduled for December 18th, 1947, 3 years and 2 days after his death, chosen deliberately by Eva May to honor the timing, to refuse to let the season forget him. The morning was cold, the sky flat gray that threatened snow but delivered none. Frost covered the ground, making the grass crunch underfoot. The rows of white headstones stretched away in perfect lines, ordered and eternal. Eva May arrived early with her sister, both wearing dark coats against the cold. Eva May carried the borrowed coat, the same one she'd worn to the train station in Muskogee when Magyar left, the one she'd worn at their courthouse wedding. The sleeves were still too long. She still kept smoothing it down. Other family members gathered slowly. Magyar's mother from Mississippi, aged significantly in the 3 years since she'd last seen her son. Some cousins. A few friends from Muskogee. Frank Thornton from the ranch. Hat in hand, face lined with genuine sorrow. The army sent a chaplain, a young white man who clearly hadn't known Magyar, who spoke in generalities about sacrifice and service. He meant well. It wasn't his fault that generic praise couldn't capture who Magyar Bradley had been. 6 soldiers served as pallbearers, strangers to Magyar, strangers to Eva May, doing their duty respectfully, but distantly. They carried the flag-draped coffin from the hearse to the gravesite with careful precision, their breath visible in the cold air. Eva May stood closest to the grave, her sister on one side, Magyar's mother on the other. She held herself very still, very straight, the way she'd learned to hold herself when things became too much to feel all at once. The chaplain read from the Bible. He spoke about dust and ashes, about resurrection and eternal life, about sacrifice and honor. The words washed over Eva May, like rain present but not penetrating, there but not really touching her. What touched her was the cold. The same cold Margaret must have felt in those final days. The biting, penetrating cold that no amount of clothing could fully defend against. She stood in it deliberately, refusing to huddle into her coat, letting it be a connection to him. The ceremony was brief, maybe 20 minutes total. The flag was folded with geometric precision and presented to Eva May by one of the soldiers. On behalf of a grateful nation, she took it. She held it. She didn't cry. Everyone expected her to cry. She could feel the expectation, the collective holding of breath, waiting for her to break down so they could comfort her. She didn't break down. Not because she wasn't devastated, but because crying felt inadequate to what she was feeling. Tears were too small, too temporary, too conventional for this loss. When the ceremony ended, people approached to offer condolences. She accepted them graciously, thanking each person, saying appropriate things, functioning in the social role expected of her. But when everyone else had left, when only her sister remained at a respectful distance, Eva May approached the grave. The coffin had been lowered. The grave wasn't filled yet. That would happen after she left, a courtesy to spare her the sound of dirt hitting wood. But she could see it there. The box containing what remained of Magger Bradley, the man who'd promised to come home. She placed her hand flat on the temporary marker. The permanent stone wouldn't be ready for weeks. The metal was so cold it burned. "You came back," she said aloud, her voice steady. "You kept your promise. Just not the way either of us wanted." She stood there for a long time, hand on the marker, saying things silently that she couldn't say aloud. Remembering, grieving, beginning the process of learning to live with his absence. Finally, she straightened. She adjusted her coat one last time, that borrowed coat with the too long sleeves, the coat that had witnessed every important moment of their relationship. She looked at the grave one more time. Then she walked away without looking back, because looking back would make leaving impossible. The years after, Eva May never remarried. This is certain. She kept the name Bradley for the rest of her life, wore her wedding ring until arthritis forced her to remove it, spoke about Mager in present tense sometimes, as though he'd just stepped out and would return soon. She continued working at the restaurant, eventually becoming manager, then co-owner when the original owner retired. The place she'd once dreamed of opening became, in a way, real, not exactly as she'd imagined, but real enough. She visited Fort Gibson every December 18th, regardless of weather. She brought flowers when she could afford them, stood silently when she couldn't. The ritual became part of her, as essential as breathing. She never got full closure, because closure wasn't possible. The official reports were vague. The investigation had been closed without charges, without answers, without accountability. She knew her husband had died. She knew approximately when and where, but the why and how remained obscured, wrapped in language designed to deflect rather than illuminate. That ambiguity haunted her differently than simple death would have. She couldn't fully mourn because she couldn't fully understand. The absence of answers created a space where questions lived forever. She died in 1983, 36 years after burying Magger. She was 72 years old. In her final years, she spoke often about Oklahoma, about the house they'd planned to buy, about the garden and the porch and the doing nothing for a week plan. "We were going to be fine," she told her sister's daughter one afternoon. The memory's still vivid despite decades of distance. "Better than fine. We had it all planned out." "I'm sorry you didn't get that," her niece said. "I'm sorry he didn't get that," Eva May corrected. "I got to live. He got to die. That's not the same kind of loss." She was buried beside Mager at Fort Gibson. Row 6, Section B, right next to him. Their headstones matched same size, same style, names, and dates in identical formatting. In death, at least, they had what they'd wanted: to stay together, to never move again. The memorial at Wereth stands quiet and persistent. 11 stones arranged in a small clearing, each bearing a name, rank, and date. The location is marked on maps now, documented, officially recognized after decades of being forgotten. Visitors come, not many, but enough. School groups learning history, veterans paying respects, descendants seeking connection to relatives they never met, tourists following Battle of the Bulge routes, and stumbling across this small tragedy within the larger tragedy. Maria Langer lived until 2012. In her final years, she gave interviews about that December day in 1944 when 11 men came to her family's house seeking shelter. She spoke slowly, carefully, still precise after all that time. "He gave me soap," she said in one recording, her voice thin with age but clear. "Clean soap. In the middle of a war, with everything terrible, he gave me soap and said thank you." "Did you use it?" the interviewer asked. "Not for years. I kept it wrapped, hidden, like it was precious. Because it was precious, not the soap itself, but what it meant that kindness still existed, that people could still care about dignity and gratitude even when they were dying." "When did you finally use it?" "In the 1950s. I was married by then, had my own home. One morning I unwrapped it and used it." She paused. "I cried the entire time. It was just soap. It didn't smell special. It didn't work better than other soap. But using it felt like closing a door that had been open too long." The memorial doesn't explain everything. It doesn't name the perpetrators. It doesn't provide full justice. But it marks. It remembers. It refuses to let convenience erase what happened. That refusal matters more than resolution. Major Bradley's headstone is clean, the engraving still sharp despite decades of weather. Someone maintains these graves, military grounds crews, paid to keep the grass trimmed and the stones upright, to preserve honor in physical form. Visitors occasionally leave things at his grave. Small American flags on veterans' holidays. Coins, as military tradition dictates. And sometimes, inexplicably, soap. Unwrapped bars of soap, left without explanation. Anonymous tributes from people who learned his story and wanted to mark it with the object that had marked him. The groundskeepers remove these items periodically as part of maintenance, but new ones appear. The gesture repeats, each soap bar, a small insistence that the story continues, that meaning persists, that remembrance requires active participation. The facts are established now, as much as facts can be after 8 decades. 11 men, December 16th through 17th, 1944. Wereth, Belgium. Captured, marched away, killed. The details beyond that remain contested. Who exactly? What exactly? Why the investigation was closed? Why accountability was never achieved? But some things are clear. Mager Bradley kept his dignity when everything tried to strip it away. He shaved in ice water. He polished boots that would be muddied within minutes. He carried soap across an ocean and gave it away when it mattered. Eva Mae Bradley honored her husband's memory with practical persistence. She brought him home. She visited his grave. She kept his name. She refused to let bureaucracy or time diminish his significance. Maria Langer's family risked everything for an hour of kindness and carried the weight of that hour for the rest of their lives. The 11 men, whose names are engraved at Wereth, were killed not randomly, but systematically, not accidentally, but deliberately, not despite being prisoners, but because they were prisoners who didn't matter to the systems that should have protected them. The soap, Woodbury soap, given by a Mississippi mother to her son, carried to Oklahoma, to England, to France, to Belgium, given to a Belgian girl, kept for years, finally used and grieved. Over the soap became more than soap. It became evidence that dignity can survive conditions designed to destroy it. That kindness can exist alongside terror. That small choices matter even when larger forces seem to render all choices meaningless. The story doesn't end with justice, because justice never came. It ends with remembrance, with names kept safe, with stories told, with memorials maintained, with soap left at graves by strangers who understand that symbols matter. What remains isn't answers. It's responsibility. The responsibility to remember that Mager Bradley existed fully, not just as a victim, but as a person who shaved carefully, loved his wife, planned for a future he'd never see, and chose gratitude over bitterness in his final hours of freedom. The responsibility to acknowledge that Eva Mae Bradley lived 40 years with an absence that never filled, a loss that never resolved, questions that never received answers. The responsibility to recognize that the Langer family's hour of compassion cost them something precious, safety, certainty, innocence about what their neighbors were capable of. The responsibility to insist that convenient silence isn't the same as necessary closure. that archived records aren't the same as resolved cases, that honoring the dead requires honoring the truth about how they died. The bar of soap sits in memory now, not in physical form. Clean, unused, given, kept, used, grieved. Symbolic of everything it was meant to be and everything it became, beyond intention. And the question it asks, what will the living do with what they've been given, remains unanswered, requiring response from each person who encounters this story. The 11 names at Wereth wait. The 2 names at Fort Gibson rest side by side. The soap, in all its forms, asks us to remember.